Hello and welcome. Today we delve into one of the most pivotal moments in human history, the dawn of the Normandy invasion, a battle that would decide the fate of millions and reshape the world forever. But beneath the surface of this colossal operation lie secrets, innovations, and deadly surprises that could have changed the course of the war in ways no one expected. Did the Germans believe their Atlantic wall defenses were impenetrable, built to withstand any assault? Were their machine gun nests, fortified with 3.5-meter thick concrete walls, truly unstoppable? Could a tiny specialized demolition charge weighing just 40 pounds turn these fortifications into rubble? And what about the British engineering teams secretly developing a new kind of tank, one capable of smashing through these seemingly invulnerable defenses? How did a young soldier, never before in combat, end up guarding a stretch of coast where every bunker, every slit, and every piece of concrete was meticulously planned to kill? Most astonishing of all, how did the Allies' most innovative armored units, known as Hobart's Funnies, prepare to unleash destruction so precise that entire bunkers could be reduced to dust with a single strike? All these questions point to one central mystery. What forces, secrets, and innovations truly determined the outcome of D-Day? In this video, we will trace the hidden engineering marvels, the secret weaponry, and the strategic genius that turned what seemed like insurmountable defenses into a battlefield of impossible odds. We will sift through the facts, peel back the layers of deception, and reveal the shocking truths that shaped history. And now the most critical question remains. How did these secret weapons and unseen strategies come together to turn the tide of the largest invasion in human history? The answers you seek are waiting, so stay with us as we begin unraveling the story behind the greatest maritime assault the world has ever known. The battle for Normandy begins right now. On the early morning of June 6, 1944, precisely at 6 o'clock amidst the thickening dawn, the Normandy coast was set to become the stage for one of the most colossal military operations in human history. Inside a tense, reinforced concrete fortification known as Wider Stanza 73, a German soldier named Wilhelm Krauss clutched the handles of his MG-42 machine gun with a steady hand. This formidable weapon, often referred to as Hitler's bus, was one of the primary tools of destruction in the German defenses along the Atlantic Wall. As he peered through a narrow embrasure, his eyes tracked the approaching gray waters of the English Channel, where the largest invasion fleet ever assembled by mankind was slowly emerging from the morning fog. Little did he realize that behind the scenes, British engineers had devised a new and devastating weapon, a specialized demolition charge weighing 40 pounds, capable of obliterating reinforced concrete with a single, catastrophic explosion. This weapon was designed to turn 2 meters of solid concrete into something as flimsy as cardboard, providing a decisive edge against the heavily armored Churchill tanks already loading into landing craft and preparing to strike ashore. The MG-42, a masterpiece of destruction that earned its nickname Hitler's bus, was known for its staggering rate of fire, capable of spewing out 1,200 rounds per minute. Its relentless burst created overlapping fields of fire, devastating any enemy formations that dared to approach. These defensive lines along the Atlantic Wall had been meticulously planned and perfected over months by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who had invested tremendous effort into positioning and tactics. Yet Krauss remained unaware of the fact that the British had been training intensively for over a year with specially modified Churchill tanks equipped with 29mm spigot mortars. These mortars could fire what were informally called the flying dustbin, a nickname inspired by their shape and destructive potential, capable of piercing the narrow firing slits from a surprisingly distant range, 80 yards away, and smashing through the thick defenses that Krauss and his comrades believed to be impenetrable. German military doctrine for these beach defenses revolved heavily around the MG-42. Entire 10-man squads were built around the weapon's capabilities, with specially organized units carrying ample ammunition, spare barrels, necessary because the machine gun's overheated barrels needed changing every 250 rounds, and protective cover for the gunner. These squads had the critical role of setting up sustained fire that could sweep clean entire platoons within seconds, creating deadly crossfires and deadly kill zones. Krauss, like many of his comrades, was part of this carefully coordinated network of defenses, which had been painstakingly constructed over months in preparation for the impending attack. In March of 1944, just over 3 months before the invasion, Krauss had observed the work crews, composed mainly of conscripted French workers and imprisoned Italians, pouring vast quantities of concrete to reinforce the defenses at his position. They built formidable walls 3.5 meters thick on the seaward side, carefully designed to withstand naval bombardments and direct tank assault. The embrasures and firing slits were deliberately angled to minimize the target's exposure, giving the attackers the smallest possible window to aim through. The particular position at WN-73, near Le Hamel, had been identified as one of the key points in the fortified line. It had been equipped with a single 25mm anti-tank gun, along with multiple MG-42 nests, protective Tobruk positions reinforced with concrete, covering the beach and the approaches from every angle. These small concrete bunkers, each meant to hold only a single soldier, dotted the coastline like toadstools sprouting from the earth. They were precisely placed to eliminate blind spots, creating overlapping kill zones that forced attacking infantry into carefully choreographed, deadly corridors of fire. The Germans studied their opponents' previous failures carefully, learning from the disastrous Canadian raid at Dieppe in August 1942, where Churchill tanks had been halted outright on the beaches, unable to penetrate the resilient defenses or climb the seawall. This outcome reinforced their belief that the fortifications they had so painstakingly built would make any similar attack virtually suicidal for the Allies. Unbeknownst to Krauss and his comrades, however, British intelligence and engineering units had been working tirelessly in secret. A crucial development was underway. An innovative Churchill tank variant designed expressly to withstand these formidable defenses and deliver a decisive blow. Lieutenant J.J. Denevan of the Royal Canadian Engineers, who had been involved in the aftermath of the Dieppe raid, had dedicated himself since then to developing this specialized tank. His efforts involved creating modifications that would enable the Churchill to survive the intense artillery and machine gun fire it would face on the beaches, and to punch through the defenses in a way that had seemed impossible before. This new tank, supported by the strategic planning of the Allied command, was expected to turn the tide of the invasion in ways that in the early hours of a pivotal day in June, the formidable and uniquely equipped units of Hobart's 79th Armored Division, famously dubbed Hobart's Funnies, prepared themselves for what would soon become a historic assault. These soldiers operated a collection of oddly shaped and heavily modified tanks and armored vehicles, designed specifically for the daunting tasks ahead, their appearance remarkably strange and quite unlike any conventional battlefield machinery. By that summer, specifically by June of 1944, the Specialized Division had already assembled an impressive arsenal, around 180 assault vehicles designated as Royal Engineers, or AVRES, each one loaded with multiple heavy demolition charges weighing 40 pounds apiece. These charges possessed the destructive power to transform heavily fortified concrete bunkers into rubble, obliterating their formidable defenses with a single well-placed strike. Just 5 kilometers east of the designated landing zone, at a vantage point called Wider Stanness number 62, a young soldier named Hinrich Sauer, barely in his 20s, operated his machine gun, the MG-42, since the early pre-dawn hours. Hinrich was the son of a humble farmer, someone who had never previously been in a combat situation or fired a shot in anger until this very morning. He was stationed in an observation post alongside Lieutenant Bernhard Furching, a seasoned officer responsible for overseeing the entire eastern section of what the Allies referred to as Omaha Beach. However, it's important to note that this designation was somewhat misleading, as several sectors along the coast faced the advancing British forces from Gold Beach, adding a complexity to the battlefield dynamic. The German 352nd Infantry Division had been rushed to this stretch of coast only a few weeks prior to the invasion, tasked with defending what they believed to be invulnerable positions. Although these troops were considered veterans, having previously fought resolutely on the Eastern Front, they faced an entirely new form of warfare. Their adversaries brought with them a kind of armor and weaponry never before encountered in their experience, weapons specifically designed to neutralize the advantages of entrenched and fortified machine gun positions that had dominated tactics and battlefield configurations since the early days of warfare, since at least the time recorded in the ancient Psalms of warfare, when fortified defenses dictated the flow of battle. The MG-42 machine gun, a weapon feared and revered by both sides, produced a distinctive high-pitched ripping sound, reminiscent of tearing canvas or fabric, which instilled widespread terror among the seasoned veterans of the Allied forces. Its presence on the battlefield was a psychological weapon as much as a physical one, causing experienced soldiers to momentarily freeze in dread. However, the men operating these formidable guns had their own fears, particularly the Germans, who knew all too well the destructive potential of the flamethrower tanks they had encountered earlier in Russia's brutal campaigns. Despite this, nothing in their previous combat experience could have fully prepared them for the revolutionary new weaponry and tactics about to be employed against them, namely the specialized armor and vehicles capable of breaking through even the most formidable defenses. The weapons designed explicitly to counteract fortifications were engineered to deliver devastating firepower directly through narrow firing slits built into bunkers and positions, firepower capable of turning concrete emplacements into heaps of rubble and dust with ease. The mathematics of the MG-42 machine gun highlighted both the simplicity of its deadly efficiency and the terror it could cause in battle. Operating at a practical rate of approximately 150 rounds per minute during sustained bursts, designed to prevent the barrel from overheating, this machine gun could, in theory, unleash or deliver approximately 32 rounds into every square foot of the beach's surface area every 10 seconds. Such a concentrated barrage created a storm of suppressive firepower capable of halting even the most determined assaults. At sites like the Canadian landing at Dieppe, this firepower had demonstrated its devastating efficiency, freezing enemies in their tracks and preventing progress through sheer volume of gunfire. Yet despite the terrifying might of this weapon, its effectiveness could be swiftly nullified by the approach of heavily armored tanks that could advance under cover of their own suppressive fire and obliterate enemy positions with a single well-aimed shot. This was a lesson learned earlier in the war in Italy, along the sector known as the Gothic Line, a series of formidable defenses stretching across the Apennine Mountains, where the 1st Fallstrumger Division, commanded by Unteroffizier Bruno Hoffmann, had been entrenched since the fall of 1943. Hoffmann's unit controlled narrow mountain passes near Monte Battaglia, where the terrain funneled Allied forces into lethal kill zones, turning every meter of their advance into a veritable bloodbath. Despite the formidable natural defenses, the British and their allies had begun implementing specialized armor devised to withstand the relentless and destructive fire they encountered. These armored vehicles not only endured longer, but also carried the firepower necessary to disarm and demolish bunkers and reinforce positions. The elite German paratroopers, who had originally been airborne troops. Soon it was clear to those fighting on the front lines that simple fortifications made of concrete and earthen embankments offered very limited protection against the relentless destructive power of flying debris and the relentless onslaught of projectiles. As the battle shrouded the landscape in chaos, soldiers quickly realized that traditional protective barriers could not shield them from the devastating impacts of the airborne dust and shrapnel that constantly threatened to tear through their defenses. Meanwhile, halfway across the globe, on the remote island of Okinawa, Japanese military engineers had been diligently studying German defensive strategies. They meticulously adapted and expanded upon these tactics, creating a complex network of defenses that went far beyond surface fortifications. Under the guidance of Colonel Yahara Hiramiki, they devised a layered, in-depth defensive system that incorporated natural caves, which were meticulously enlarged and reinforced to serve as underground fortresses. These subterranean strongholds extended deep into the landscape, transforming natural caves into formidable fortresses capable of withstanding direct assaults. Within each of these underground cavities, entire artillery stations were concealed and fortified. Heavy machine guns of Type 92, the Japanese equivalent of the formidable MG-42, were strategically positioned to cover all approaching routes with a coordinated, interlocking fire pattern. These weapons could remain virtually invisible until the moment when Allied forces were fully committed into the kill zones, catching them off guard. The Japanese defenders had learned from German reports detailed accounts of Allied armor capabilities and believed that their deeply embedded positions, some carved as deep as 30 feet into solid bedrock, would prove virtually impervious to any conventional demolition charges, explosive breaching attempts, or direct hits. They held the conviction that their carefully concealed, deeply entrenched positions would withstand even the most intense bombardments, providing a formidable obstacle to any invading force. However, they had not yet fully grasped how much the American military had advanced in developing specialized weaponry designed to combat such well-prepared defenses. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, the Americans had constructed modified Sherman tanks, equipped with Navy marquee flamethrowers capable of projecting a high-velocity napalm gasoline mixture as far as 200 yards into cave mouths and underground tunnels. These innovative modifications posed a significant threat to the Japanese subterranean defenses, threatening to turn their own caves into infernal chambers. Back at the command post in Lou Hamel, as the dawn of June 6th unfurled, Krauss listened intently to the crescendo of naval bombardment that was intensifying with each passing moment. The deafening roar of shells from British cruisers HMS Ajax and HMS Argonaut filled the sky, shrieking overhead in rapid succession before striking the distant shorelines behind his position. Most of these shells failed to penetrate the thick, reinforced concrete that protected his machine gun emplacement, reinforcing his initial false sense of security. Krauss clung to the belief that the Atlantic Wall, the formidable line of defenses constructed along the coast, would hold firm, just as Rommel had assured. Yet, a growing sense of unease crept into his mind as he observed that the preliminary bombardment seemed lighter than anticipated. It was almost as if the Allied forces were deliberately conserving their heavy firepower for the moment of imminent assault, choosing to preserve their destructive capacity for the actual capture rather than wasting it on annihilating the defenses beforehand. Near Krauss, his gun crew was diligently maintaining their machine gun, with Gerrit Muller operating the loader position and Schutz Wagner managing the ammunition supply. Both men were trained to perform a critical and highly technical task, changing the overheated barrel of the MG-42 in less than 20 seconds. This skill was essential because the weapon's tendency to overheat posed a real threat, with the potential to cause catastrophic jamming that could leave their position vulnerable at a crucial moment in the battle. Neither Muller nor Wagner could foresee that their words and actions would be measured in hours rather than days, as the battlefield disorder and relentless fire would soon render their positions compromised much sooner than expected. At precisely 7:25 hours, the first wave of British troops from the United Kingdom's 50th Infantry Division began softly disembarking onto the sands of Gold Beach. Hesitant at first, then gaining momentum as they pressed forward, Krauss responded immediately, unleashing a relentless barrage of fire from his MG-42, which performed exactly as it was designed to do. With precise, controlled bursts of 7 to 10 rounds, Krauss cut down soldiers from the 1st Hampshire Regiment as they struggled through the surf, their movements slowed by the shifting sands and the chaos of an active battlefield. Each burst was carefully maintained to prevent jamming, even as the barrel by this time was beginning to heat up from sustained firing, a clear sign of how intensely the battle had begun. Krauss was deeply focused on his sector of fire, unaware of the newer, more dangerous threats lurking just beyond his limited field of vision, the specialized tanks that had been unloaded beyond his line of sight, modern war machines designed to counter their defenses. The British forces, having gained valuable intelligence from under the ominous gray skies of the battlefield, the air was thick with tension and anticipation. Deep within a hidden reserve bunker, situated behind the main defensive line, Officer Henrik Knob of the famed 325th Infantry Division was diligently working through his training regimen. His role was crucial. He had been primed and conditioned to quickly recognize different types of Allied tanks using specialized recognition cards designed for this purpose. These cards contained detailed images and specifications, allowing him to identify enemy armored vehicles swiftly and accurately during combat scenarios. However, when the first heavy, imposing Churchill AVRE tanks silently advanced from the shoreline, Henrik's trained eyes found themselves momentarily confused. The reason? The appearance of these tanks defied his expectations. Unlike the more familiar and streamlined 75mm Shermans or the standard Churchill tanks shown in his training materials, these AVRES boasted enormous, stubby guns, vastly different in shape and size from the elongated barrel guns he had memorized. Their wide, squat profiles, coupled with the enormous bore of their main weapons, presented an almost comical contrast to the sleek, long-tubed anti-tank guns that the Germans and Allies alike had favored throughout the war. These weapons looked more like child's toys, clunky, disproportionate, and oddly charming in an incongruous way. Yet what they lacked in aesthetic finesse, they made up for with devastating purpose. The key element of their armament was the petard mortar, a unique, purpose-built demolition system mounted onto the AVRES. This specialized weapon had been the brainchild of Colonel Blacker, a man renowned for his inventive engineering. Colonel Blacker had previously devised the notorious Blacker Bombard, a type of spigot mortar used by the Home Guard, featuring a revolutionary mechanism designed to absorb recoil and reload swiftly. The petard mortar, in particular, was an engineering masterpiece. It employed a colossal spring capable of absorbing and reusing 20 tons of recoil energy to automatically recock itself after each firing. This innovative system enabled the mortar crew to fire enormous 40-pound demolition charges with remarkable precision, enough to punch through concrete bunkers and emplacements from distances as close as 80 yards. Meanwhile, the British assault engineers belonging to the 79th Armored Division had undergone extensive and rigorous training at the Assault Preparation School situated in Suffolk. There they constructed highly realistic replicas of German defensive bunkers, allowing them to drill tactics for approaching and neutralizing underground strongpoints. This training emphasized tight coordination between the engineers, infantry units, and accompanying tanks, especially the specialized AVRES. These combat engineers learned to orchestrate a deadly dance, suppressing enemy positions with coordinated fire and smoke to clear a safe path for the advance. Their combined efforts aimed to turn German defensive tactics against them, leveraging their predictable fields of fire to plan covered and protected approaches. Each AVRE was operated by a dedicated crew of 6 personnel. This crew comprised 5 Royal Engineers, whose expertise lay in demolition and engineering, and a single Royal Armored Corps driver responsible for navigating the vehicle through treacherous terrain. Additionally, a demolition non-commissioned officer coordinated the handling and placement of charges, a task of incredible precision and nerve. The most perilous duty belonged to the co-driver assigned to the petard mortar. To reload the weapon once it had been fired, he had to expose his hands and arms through a narrow sliding hatch. With the weapon opened up like an enormous shotgun, he manually loaded the next 40-pound demolition round, all while under the relentless threat of enemy gunfire. The machine guns and anti-aircraft weapons mounted on the tank would often open fire, sizzling and rattling as they sought to down the moving target and suppress the crew. Just beyond the front lines, at a position designated Wider Stanness 36 near Nels Feldwebel, the commander of another MG-42 machine gun position, Feldwebel Auditor, had just reported to his battalion headquarters. He detailed a sobering statistic. His weapon had fired over 3,000 rounds within the first hour of the invasion, a staggering volume that underscored the intense and relentless combat taking place. His crew had burned through 3 spare barrels, each one cooling and being replaced amidst a rain of spent brass casings clattering against the concrete floor of their bunker. Brass shells sparkled and rolled beneath their feet as team members hurried to feed fresh belts of ammunition into the insatiable machine gun, trying to keep a continuous curtain of fire against the invading forces. Suddenly, Feldwebel Auditor's attention was drawn to an approaching tank, which seemed to be moving cautiously toward their position. As he watched, the tank drew within about 80 yards of his emplacement, an ominous sign. What caught his eye was not only the tank's approach, but also what appeared to be a bundle of logs mounted on its front. This unusual load was part of its auxiliary equipment, an intriguing, if unexpected, feature of the vehicle's design. In reality, this tank was a variant of the strength of the British armament, particularly the formidable Churchill AVRE, stood out as a remarkable asset during the Normandy invasion. In an effort to swiftly demolish a heavily fortified enemy structure, a Churchill AVRE was ordered to unleash a specially designed demolition device, the petard, aimed at obliterating the house with precision. As the attack unfolded, a small, seemingly innocuous flying device, resembling a tiny airborne dustbin, struck just above the house's front entrance. The impact proved catastrophic, causing the building to collapse in a sudden, domino-like fashion, as if a carefully stacked deck of cards had been expertly toppled. The debris rained down, spilling out into the courtyard along with the defenders, who hurriedly retreated amidst a chaos of machine guns, anti-tank weapons, and a torrent of flying bricks. This description, while technically accurate and detailed, failed to fully convey the terror that gripped the German defenders, witnessing these weapons in action. The psychological impact was swift and profoundly unsettling. Rumors spread along the German defensive lines that the British had developed a weapon capable of turning reinforced concrete bunkers into nothing more than fragile structures with a single shot. Such news caused some MG-42 machine gun crews to abandon their posts altogether, preferring to risk escape rather than to face the certainty of death once an AVR, an armored vehicle equipped with a revolutionary demolition gun, approached their positions. The device itself was officially labeled as the #1 demolition bomb, a name that underscored its significance. It was a streamlined projectile measuring approximately 636 millimeters in length with a diameter of 230 millimeters. Filled with 40 pounds of high explosive, it possessed the remarkable ability to penetrate at least 2 meters of reinforced concrete before detonating. More often than not, it could be inserted through an embrasure and explode inside a bunker, turning the confined interior into a deadly death trap. The explosion's destructive force was magnified by the reflected blast waves bouncing off the thick concrete walls, thereby multiplying its lethal effect and causing catastrophic destruction. Previously, the Germans had encountered demolition charges primarily through satchel charges employed by their combat engineers. These charges required soldiers, often under heavy fire, to approach enemy fortifications on foot and manually place the explosives, a task bordering on suicidal against well-defended MG-42 machine gun nests. In contrast, the AVRE could deliver the same devastating effect from a position of relative safety, thanks to its armor plating that could withstand all types of counterfire, except a direct hit from a formidable 88mm gun. By the early morning hours of D-Day, around 8 o'clock, the first AVREs had engaged in combat along the beaches defended by British and Canadian forces. The 5th Assault Regiment of the Royal Engineers supported the 50th Division at Gold Beach, while the 6th Assault Regiment provided aid alongside the 3rd Canadian Division at Juno Beach, and the 42nd Assault Regiment operated with the 3rd British Division at Sword Beach. Each regiment fielded dozens of these specialized Churchill tanks, which systematically dismantled what had once been perceived as impregnable German strongpoints. In particular, the 26th Assault Squadron, supporting the Canadian advance at Juno Beach, managed to destroy 6 major concrete bunkers within the first 3 hours of the invasion, including the notorious one commanded by Lieutenant Bill Dunn. This bunker, referred to colloquially as Charlie Havre, had blocked a vital exit point from the beach. Its destruction was a key achievement, although the assault on this fortification ultimately resulted in the tank becoming immobilized when it became stuck in a shell crater, forcing the crew to abandon it. Prior to its abandonment, however, the AVRE crew demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of the petard mortar against German fortifications. At Lou Hamel, where the formidable MG-42 had inflicted heavy casualties on British troops, creating a severe bottleneck threatening to halt the entire advance on the western flank of Gold Beach, the power of this weapon was evident. Since early morning hours, Company C of the 1st Hampshire had been pinned down in this critical area, enduring horrific casualties as they attempted to flank the German positions. An urgent situation developed, and Major Warren took command after Lieutenant Colonel Nelson was either injured or otherwise rendered unavailable. Despite the chaos and heavy fire, the innovative use of armored vehicles with specialized demolition capabilities demonstrated the kind of technological edge that was pivotal to the success of the Allied invasion. An edge that was built, in no small part, on the remarkable design and destructive power of these Churchill AVRE units. Lieutenant Smith, gravely wounded, understood that their only remaining option was to maneuver around the heavily fortified German position and launch a daring attack from behind. Such a tactic, however, was fraught with peril and could take precious hours, hours spent under relentless enemy fire, making timing and precision absolutely critical. The German defenses at Lowell presented a formidable obstacle. Their fortifications were designed to withstand intense assaults and to dominate the surrounding terrain with deadly efficiency. At the heart of these defenses was a substantial casemate housing a 75mm gun, meticulously oriented eastward to sweep along the coastline, providing enfilade fire across the beach. This formidable gun emplacement was safeguarded by a reinforced concrete wall, nearly 3.5 meters thick, which faced seawards and served as a nearly impenetrable barrier. Surrounding this central position were multiple MG-42 machine gun emplacements, set within the ruins of nearby buildings, creating a web of overlapping fields of fire. This interlocking defensive network rendered any approach from the front an almost certain death trap, transforming the area into a veritable slaughter zone. As one British soldier later described it, a complete killing ground where nothing could survive. It was not until the afternoon around 3 o'clock that an AVRE, Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, from the 82nd Assault Squadron, finally managed to advance into a position that could deliver a decisive blow. Under cover provided by Shermans from the Westminster Dragoons, the armored engineer vehicle carefully navigated the maze of rubble and cratered terrain, with its driver skillfully steering through the debris and its commanding officer directing supporting infantry to create a distraction by suppressing the German defenses with small arms fire. This diversion was crucial as it allowed the massive Churchill tank to rumble closer to the target, its armor absorbing any stray bullets while it approached the bunker. The tank's commander, Sergeant James Patterson, a coal miner from Durham who had volunteered to serve in the Royal Engineers, meticulously positioned his vehicle approximately 75 yards from the main bunker. As he traversed the turret, he aligned the stubby Petard mortar with the narrow embrasure where Krauss's MG-42 had been relentlessly spitting death for the past 8 hours. The German gunner, still frantically firing desperate bursts at the advancing infantry, remained oblivious to the imminent danger. In that moment, Patterson's crew prepared to strike a crippling blow. The first padded round hit the reinforced concrete just above the enemy's embrasure with a deafening explosion that shook the entire structure. The force of the blast sent chunks of concrete flying like shrapnel, momentarily stunning everyone within the bunker. Though the structure was not penetrated, the shock wave's destructive power was immense, creating a deafening roar that echoed through the defenses. Sapper Tommy Clark, the tank's loader, was already working methodically despite the chaos, prying open the mortar to insert a fresh charge, an unyielding routine honed from countless previous operations, even amidst the cacophony of machine gun fire ricocheting off the tank's armor. The second round, carefully aimed and precisely fired, struck true. It entered directly through the same embrasure and detonated inside the bunker with a force that was almost apocalyptic in its intensity. The 40-pound charge of high-explosive Packung compressed within the confined space, unleashing a blast wave so powerful that it ruptured eardrums and collapsed lungs among the crew. The reinforced concrete walls, once a protective barrier, became an echo chamber that magnified the destruction, with debris and dust billowing outward. The explosion claimed the lives of Krauss and his entire crew instantly, the force obliterating their defensive position in an instant. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the same ever was directed to fire a third Petard round, this time into the rear entrance of the main casemate at the Lou Hamel strongpoint. This final strike finally silenced the 75mm gun that had wrought havoc along the shoreline all day long. The explosion was so intense that it shattered surrounding windows and caused shock waves to ripple through the nearby area. The blast was formidable enough to dislodge and disorient the remaining German defenders, who, shaken and demoralized, abandoned their weapons and fled toward the village below. What followed was a swift, determined pursuit, house-to-house fighting that continued into the night, with soldiers on both sides engaging in close-quarters combat until the darkness forced a temporary halt. Although the destruction of the primary bunker effectively shattered the core of the German defenses at Lowell, the psychological impact of this success sent a ripple effect along the entire line. News of the impressive demolition and the destruction of key enemy positions spread rapidly among the surviving German units, sowing confusion and doubt about their capacity to hold their ground any longer. The strategic victory, coupled with the tangible demonstration of Allied firepower and ingenuity, dealt a significant blow to the morale of the defenders, ultimately contributing to the gradual collapse of during the tumultuous years of World War II. A revolutionary development in armored warfare emerged that profoundly altered the battlefield landscape, instilling fear and chaos among enemy troops. It was widely whispered among veterans and strategists alike that there existed a class of tanks so formidable, so devastating in their destructive capability, that they could obliterate any bunker or fortified position with a single well-placed shot. Such machines struck terror into the hearts of the German machine gun crews manning their extensive defensive networks. These soldiers had been reassured time and again that their concrete emplacements, rigidly constructed and fortified, would serve as the ultimate safeguard against any attack the Allies could muster. Yet with the advent of these new British tank designs, that illusion shattered. Instead of serving as invulnerable shields, many fortifications became death traps, vulnerable to the mere flick of a mighty cannon whose power exceeded all expectations and previous technological limitations. Across the Italian front, particularly along the menacing Gothic line, German military commanders received reports concerning the Allied landings in Normandy with growing apprehension. Use of specialized new-generation tanks capable of neutralizing heavily fortified positions was a source of increasing alarm. The accounts described vehicles equipped with weapons so potent that they could penetrate months of defensive construction, destroying entrenched strongpoints with alarming ease. Such reports prompted the High Command, led by General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, to urgently seek detailed intelligence about these advanced weapons. He understood all too well that these new tanks could dramatically shift the balance of power. Despite their efforts to develop effective countermeasures, by that point it was largely too late. The technological leap had outpaced their defenses. German engineers could only advise dispersing forces into smaller, more scattered units and avoiding large concentrations of fortifications that could be tallied with a single precise shot, a tactic often referred to as avoiding kill zones, vulnerable to these formidable weapons. The morale among German Allied forces fighting in Italy, particularly the Italian RSI, Italian Social Republic troops, suffered tremendously in light of these developments. Many of these soldiers had already witnessed firsthand just how potent Allied specialized armor had become. Their confidence was shattered after the dramatic breakthrough at the Casino in the Anzio-Nettuno campaign, where British Churchill crocodile flamethrower tanks, mounted with fearsome flamethrowers nicknamed the blowtorch and corkscrew by exhausted troops, had successfully burned out fortified positions that had withstood assaults for months. Combining these massive heat-spewing machines with assault vehicle Royal Engineers, the Allies unleashed a terrifying new form of combined arms warfare. The sight of walls of fire, waves of blistering heat, and the destruction of entrenched defenses created a psychological impact that eroded the fighting spirit of even well-trained troops. Further east on the Pacific island of Okinawa, Japanese forces initially regarded reports about Allied bunker buster tanks, especially those capable of demolishing subterranean fortifications, with skepticism. Their military attaché in Berlin had dismissed these tales as Allied propaganda designed to undermine Japanese morale. The Japanese believed their extensive cave systems, carved into solid rock and deeply hidden beneath the island's surface, would resist even the most powerful demolition charges. They were confident that their layered defenses, including machine guns like the Type 92 and Type 96, which could unleash approximately 500 rounds per minute from concealed cave entrances, would thwart any such attack. However, by April of the year 1945, the Japanese stance on these new threats changed dramatically. The reality of the destructive power possessed by the American forces became undeniable. U.S. Navy commissioned Sherman tanks modified specifically for anti-fortification missions, with flamethrowers began systematically turning tunnels and cave systems into infernos. The flames, fueled by a volatile mixture known as napalm, flowed like liquid death through the labyrinthine cave networks, consuming oxygen and reaching blistering temperatures that exceeded 1,000 degrees Celsius. The Japanese had concentrated their machine guns, including Type 92 and Type 96 models, at strategic points, particularly at cave mouths and approach routes, creating deadly kill zones. These emplacements could dominate key terrain features and effectively cut off American forces if they dared to advance. In response, American infantry units promptly called for specialized armored support. Their request led to the deployment of the 113th Tank Battalion, newly outfitted at the historic Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. Every tank in this battalion was converted into a flamethrower tank, a modification that transformed the once traditional battle vehicle into a fearsome instrument of fiery destruction. The commanding officer of this force, Colonel Yahara, had developed his defensive strategy for Okinawa, drawing upon lessons learned from the brutal European battles, especially the German experience of establishing multiple, mutually supporting defensive lines. These strongholds were designed so that even if individual positions were destroyed, the overall system would continue to resist and fight on. Yet, despite these well-planned counter to widely held assumptions, the battlefield tactics employed by some German units during the Normandy invasion proved to be unexpectedly resilient, even against the most innovative armored and engineering units the Allies deployed. Indeed, there came a strategy so effective that it caused even the most seasoned Japanese soldiers, those who had sworn unconditionally to defend their positions to the very end, to abandon their posts. These positions were often fortresses of concrete, designed to withstand relentless assaults. Yet under this tactic, they were systematically overrun and rendered useless in moments. As the D-Day operation unfolded in the afternoon, the German commanders stationed along the Normandy coast found themselves becoming increasingly frantic. They received reports from their frontline units that painted a dire picture. British tanks equipped with short, wide guns, an unconventional design, were methodically demolishing bunkers that had taken months, sometimes years, to construct and fortify. These bunkers, meant to serve as formidable defenses, were being destroyed almost instantly by these innovative tanks. One German officer, General Major Wilhelm Richter, who commanded the 716th Infantry Division, witnessed firsthand how an AVRE, or Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, could wipe out a Tobruk-style bunker with a single precise shot. The small concrete structure simply disintegrated into a cloud of dust and debris in an instant, leaving no trace of its former existence. This sudden and alarming development prompted the general to immediately reach out to Rommel's headquarters, attempting to relay the pressing threat posed by the specialized British vehicles. However, at that critical juncture, the overall German command was severely hampered. The field marshal commanding German forces was still in Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday, having been misled by weather forecasts. These forecasts had suggested that the weather conditions were too poor for an invasion to proceed, which led to a fragmented and poorly coordinated German response. Amidst the chaos, individual commanders on the ground scrambled to adapt to these new weapons, an obstacle they had not anticipated and which they did not fully understand. In the aftermath of the initial assault, the surviving crews manning the MG-42 machine guns were ordered to fall back to secondary positions. Yet these hastily established defenses offered little solace. The AVRES, armed with powerful petard mortars and explosive charges, could simply drive up to these makeshift trenches and demolish them at close range. The destructive power of the large demolition charges turned machine gun nests into craters, often obliterating entire squads with a single blast as the shock wave traveled through the trench networks. What had begun as a firm line of defense quickly became a chaotic field of destruction. German military doctrine had historically placed great emphasis on the MG-42 machine gun, seeing it as the cornerstone of their infantry tactics. Soldiers were trained to see riflemen as mainly carrying ammunition and switching barrels for the machine gun, which could unleash a torrent of fire for extended periods. This concentration of firepower in a single formidable weapon system had proved effective in traditional combat scenarios. However, when faced with a new type of enemy capable of destroying such a weapon with a well-placed demolition charge, this strategy became a significant vulnerability. At a specific position along the line, referred to by the code name Widerstandes 62, an NCO named Hinrich Sello had been firing his MG-42 relentlessly for 9 straight hours. Later accounts claimed he had fired 12,000 rounds and inflicted over 1,000 casualties. Whether these figures are entirely accurate remains uncertain, given the fog of war and the trauma experienced during combat. Eventually, American forces from the 16th Infantry Regiment managed to breach this strong point at approximately 8:25 in the morning evening, not through specialized armor or heavy weapons, but by sheer manpower and unwavering determination. Sello, who had survived the ordeal by abandoning his post once his ammunition was exhausted, later published an account of his experiences. This account generated controversy decades later because he claimed to have single-handedly halted the American advance. Nevertheless, what remains uncontested is that the fortified MG-42 positions at WN-62 and similar sites along Omaha Beach held out far longer than their counterparts facing British forces. This was no accident. It was largely due to the fact that the Americans rejected the use of what were known as Hobart's funnies, including the AVREs and other specialized engineering vehicles, foregoing the very tools that could have easily neutralized these strong points. This strategic decision was influenced by a variety of factors, including command judgments and logistical considerations. General Omar Bradley, leading the American forces, opted to decline most of the British-provided specialized armor, accepting only the amphibious DD tanks designed for rapid deployment in water. He intentionally rejected the use of AVRES, crocodiles, and other funnies that had demonstrated their effectiveness against fortified positions earlier in the war, a choice that would come under sharp criticism for its potential role in the near disaster at Omaha Beach. The consequences of these decisions underscored the impact of tactical choices made at higher command levels, often based on incomplete information or strategic misjudgment. On the initial day of the invasion, American forces endured devastating losses, with casualties exceeding 2,000 soldiers. Many of these defected to enemy MG-42 machine gun positions, which could have been swiftly neutralized using petard mortars. Powerful explosive devices capable of demolishing fortified emplacements with minimal risk. The U.S. military's traditional approach relied heavily on combined arms tactics, integrating infantry assaults, artillery fire, and standard tank operations working in concert to suppress and eliminate German defenses. However, this strategy came with an inherent cost: far higher troop casualties. Soldiers had to physically assault well-fortified positions, many of which could have been dismantled almost instantly by explosive charges weighing no more than 40 pounds, if only the right tools had been employed. The German High Command's efforts to counter the emerging threat posed by specialized armor, such as the AVRE, Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, were hampered by a rigid command structure that struggled to adapt swiftly. Compounding their difficulties was the disruption of communication lines, caused both by Allied air superiority, which consistently targeted German communication hubs, and sabotage undertaken by local French resistance fighters who sought to undermine German defenses. As a result, many German units remained unaware of the presence and capabilities of these innovative vehicles until they were already under attack. This lack of timely intelligence fostered confusion and panic among German troops, as weapons that they had regarded as invulnerable suddenly became lethal traps capable of annihilating entire fortifications with devastating efficiency. Field Marshal Gere von Reunet, who oversaw all German forces operating in Western Europe, later reflected that the advent of specialized armored vehicles designed to break through concrete fortifications rendered their entire defensive strategy obsolete. He acknowledged that the appearance of these formidable vehicles invalidated their expectations of static defenses holding long enough for mobile reserves to counterattack. Yet he also recognized the sobering reality that even if Germany had been aware of these weapons earlier, the nation lacked the resources necessary to develop effective countermeasures or retrofit their defenses accordingly. By the end of June the 6th, night had fallen over the battlefield. The British 50th Infantry Division had made significant progress, advancing nearly 10 kilometers inland from Gold Beach. With the assistance of AVRES and other specialized armored vehicles, they managed to destroy or seize dozens of German strongpoints, significantly weakening the enemy's defensive network. Meanwhile, at Omaha Beach, American forces had struggled to secure a foothold amid catastrophic casualties incurred during assaults on positions that could have been obliterated effortlessly with a single petard round. The stark contrast between the two beaches did not escape the notice of American commanders, who quickly recognized the strategic advantage conferred by such specialized armor. Within mere weeks following the initial landings, U.S. forces began requesting support from British AVRE units to aid in breaching formidable German fortifications. However, due to their limited numbers, since these specialized vehicles were primarily maintained by Commonwealth forces, they remained somewhat scarce in the American sector. Still, the psychological effect wrought by these vehicles extended well beyond their actual destructive capacity. German soldiers, many of whom had never encountered an AVRE in action, started evacuating fortified positions at the mere rumor or sight of approaching British tanks. This widespread abandonment set off a cascading wave of retreat, severely undermining the entire concept of the Atlantic Wall, which had been predicated on the assumption that massive concrete defenses could withstand prolonged bombardment, allowing German mobile reserves sufficient time to mount a counterattack. The MG-42 machine gun, which had been the backbone of German defensive doctrine since the early days of the war, specifically from 1942 onward, began to seem increasingly obsolete in the face of enemy tactics and technology. The familiar, reliable gun that had once dominated battlefield defenses was rendered almost powerless against an adversary capable of quickly destroying it and its crew from beyond the weapon's effective firing range with a single shot or explosive device. This realization prompted a profound reevaluation of German defensive tactics, forcing military planners to reconsider the viability of static, heavily fortified lines in an environment where technologically advanced weapons could neutralize such defenses swiftly and decisively. In the weeks that followed D-Day, as Allied forces advanced further inland through the rugged terrain of the Normandy bocage, AVRES continued to demonstrate their strategic value against stubborn German strongpoints. Nonetheless, their deployment was often constrained by the close terrain, which limited mobility and rendered some vehicles more vulnerable to Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck anti-tank weapons. Despite these limitations, the specialized armor remained a critical element in breaching fortified positions and enabling the Allied breakthrough, which gradually eroded the German defensive line and paved the way for the subsequent rapid advance into occupied France. The threat posed by specialized Allied armor, particularly the advanced AVRE units, became increasingly apparent as the war progressed. These weapons, often concealed and firing from concealed positions, proved devastating to entrenched German defenses. The Germans, having quickly recognized that the AVRE's formidable frontal armor did not extend to its sides or rear, adapted their tactics accordingly. According to the war diary of the 79th Armored Division, by the end of June in the year of 1944, they had successfully destroyed over 400 German fortifications, including bunkers, pillboxes, and reinforced buildings. Each of these destruction efforts not only eliminated threats, but potentially saved numerous Allied lives that would have otherwise been lost in traditional, heavily infantry-supported assaults. In an attempt to counter this new threat, German forces issued orders to deploy machine gun positions in depth, rather than concentrating them at single, heavily fortified points. The strategy aimed to disperse their firepower, making it more difficult for the AVRES to take out multiple weapons with a single demolition charge. However, this dispersal, diluting the defensive strength, created a new vulnerability. Poorly concentrated positions were more susceptible to an organized infantry assault, which could exploit the gaps. This tactical conundrum left commanders with no perfect solution, forcing them into difficult choices regarding how best to defend against the emerging armor tactics. Some German units tried peculiar improvisations to address the menace. Among these was the use of captured French tanks, which were partially buried with their turrets embedded deep into the ground. These makeshift fortifications aimed to serve as mobile pillboxes, hardened positions that could be quickly relocated if needed. Unfortunately, these mud-bound, hastily prepared defenses proved even more vulnerable than expected, particularly to the precise and powerful petard mortars employed by the Allies. The thinner armor of the immobilized tanks could be penetrated with relative ease, allowing mortar explosions to ignite devastating internal fires that caused casualties and rendered the improvised defenses ineffective. In the Italian theater, similar tactical adaptations emerged. German forces stationed along the Gothic line abandoned their elaborate, heavily reinforced concrete fortifications in favor of more scattered, natural terrain-based positions. This shift to dispersed defenses aimed to make it harder for the Allies, especially British and Indian troops known for their probing patrols, to locate and destroy strong points. The Allies' tactics of night infiltration and coordinated attacks from unexpected directions exploited the vulnerabilities of these less concentrated positions, gradually wearing down the German defenses in the rugged landscape. Meanwhile, morale among the Italian RS-1 Republic of Italy forces deteriorated further as the war dragged on. Already demoralized by the fall of Rome and the evident futility of their cause, many battalions faced a crisis when confronted with the new Allied weapons. Reports of advanced wonder weapons, which earned the nickname Io Tribe Britannis, a mocking term equating them to monstrous British devices, spread panic. These included the AVRES and Churchill Crocodile flamethrowers, which combined to overwhelm the pontifical Italian units. Entire battalions, perceiving little hope of successful resistance, surrendered rather than face the combined onslaught of these devastating weapons. On the Eastern Front, the Germans endured a desperate defensive struggle against the Red Army's summer offensive, Operation Bagration. German commanders noted with growing alarm that Soviet forces had rapidly begun deploying similar specialized armor to counter the Allies' innovations. These included modified T-34 tanks equipped with mine rollers designed to clear obstacles and KV tanks converted into flamethrowers, tactics suggesting that the Allies and Soviets were sharing technology and tactical ideas. The appearance of such vehicles signified a disturbing escalation. The nightmare scenario of facing bunker-busting tanks on multiple fronts was no longer theoretical, but a grim reality by the autumn of 1944. This mounting pressure stretched German defensive resources beyond their limits, accelerating the breakdown of their once formidable defenses and hastening the collapse of the Third Reich itself. Across the Pacific, the Japanese military leadership in Berlin received increasingly frantic reports. Colonel Nishitichi, commanding Japanese forces in Europe, urgently telegraphed to Tokyo about the alarming developments. He warned that traditional defensive tactics, relying on fortified positions and machine gun strongpoints, had become obsolete in the face of these advanced armor techniques. Instead, he advocated for a shift toward tactics emphasizing mobility and concealment, aiming to avoid direct confrontation with the hardened, specialized Allied vehicles. By that time, however, Japanese forces were already committed to static defenses at strategic locations such as Iwima and Okinawa. Their focus on fortified positions and entrenched lines reflected a different approach, rooted in the hopes of overwhelming the Allies through sheer resilience. Yet, the rapidly evolving battlefield technology and tactics made these static defenses increasingly vulnerable, illustrating the fundamental shift in warfare from static fronts to dynamic, highly mobile engagements driven by technological innovation. During the fierce and relentless battles of World War II, the vulnerability of static defensive positions to innovative assault tactics became painfully apparent, often with catastrophic consequences. Despite years of meticulous study by Japanese military strategists of German defensive successes on the Eastern Front, they failed to grasp the critical advancements made by Allied forces, particularly the development of specialized armor designed specifically to annihilate fortified positions. This oversight proved to be a fatal flaw that undermined some of their most formidable defenses. On the island of Okinawa, for instance, the Japanese 32nd Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Ushima Mitsuru, had constructed an incredibly intricate and heavily fortified network intended to serve as an impregnable bastion against invading forces. This elaborate defensive arrangement spanned over 60 miles of tunnels meticulously carved into the limestone bedrock, connecting a complex web of defensive stations. Each tunnel and position was strategically placed to provide overlapping and interlocking fields of fire, creating deadly crossfire zones that could sweep any attacker attempting to breach their lines. These underground complexes were thoughtfully concealed so that they remained hidden until the American forces had already committed fully to the assault, making the defenses seem even more formidable at first glance. The design of these underground defenses was, in theory, a masterpiece of military engineering. An almost invulnerable fortress that should have been immune to conventional attack methods. Yet the arrival of the American 17th Tank Battalion, with a formidable contingent of 54 Sherman tanks, converted specifically into flamethrower tanks, spelled disaster for these seemingly secure fortifications. When the flamethrowers roared to life, they unleashed torrents of fire that penetrated the tunnel systems with terrifying ease, following every passage, ventilation shaft, and air vent like water flowing effortlessly through a labyrinth. Such incendiary assaults turned what was intended to be a safe static defense into a lethal death trap, incinerating entire Japanese companies in walls of searing flames. The elaborate tunnel networks and fortified positions, once believed to be nearly invulnerable, dissolved into death chambers under the relentless onslaught of such specialized armor. This devastating revelation was not lost on the Germans. Intelligence transmitted through their embassy in Tokyo, even before Japan's surrender, confirmed their worst fears about the obsolescence of static and heavily fortified defenses in the face of modern mobile warfare. One particularly stark report noted that the Americans had perfected a tactic that the British had begun employing during the Normandy landings: the systematic destruction of fortified German positions using specialized armored vehicles equipped with flamethrowers and other assault weapons. Unlike traditional artillery or infantry assaults, these vehicles could directly target and eliminate entrenched defenses with surgical precision, rendering conventional defensive concepts increasingly useless and obsolete. This realization marked a bitter recognition of strategic and tactical failure on the part of those who believed in static, heavily fortified positions as a cornerstone of defensive doctrine. The German MG-42 machine gun, which had once been the pride of their infantry and a symbol of their battlefield dominance from the deserts of North Africa to the icy Arctic front, was rapidly becoming irrelevant in the face of this new form of assault. The MG-42, renowned for its high rate of fire and versatility, was ultimately rendered powerless by even the simplest of countermeasures, including the seemingly innocuous spigot mortar firing what resembled a flying dustbin. These improvised incendiary devices and specialized vehicles turned the once feared machine gun into a relic, highlighting how even the most iconic weapons could become obsolete when confronted with innovative tactical countermeasures. The broader impact of these developments extended far beyond the battlefield tactics themselves. The introduction and deployment of specialized engineering vehicles, such as the British AVRE, Armored Vehicle Royal Engineer, fundamentally changed how military planners approached the concept of fortification and the defense of strategic positions. The AVRE, designed explicitly for mobility and destruction of enemy bunkers and fortifications, demonstrated to armies worldwide that no position, no matter how thoroughly fortified or well-armed, was truly invulnerable. Its influence went well beyond the immediate destruction of bunkers. It reshaped doctrines and strategic thinking across generations of military forces. This transformation underscored a vital lesson. The era of static defenses, reliant solely on immovable structures and heavy weaponry, was coming to an end. The reliance of German defensive doctrine on the MG-42 as a foundation created a critical Achilles heel, a vulnerability that, when exploited by specialized Allied armor and engineering vehicles, turned their own strengths into deadly liabilities. Defenders' concentrated firepower, so effective against unprepared infantry, became an easy target for these assault vehicles, which could bypass static defenses altogether through tunneling, demolition, or incendiary tactics. This shift in battlefield dynamics played a crucial role in the eventual defeat of German forces, illustrating how well-planned innovations could achieve strategic dominance. The lessons derived from the employment of vehicles like the AVRE and flamethrower tanks during the conflict profoundly influenced military doctrine for decades to come. Every major army recognized the necessity of developing specialized engineering and assault vehicles capable of overcoming fortified defenses. From the Soviet IMR series of combat, modern military forces continue to study the historic Normandy campaign as an exemplary case of specialized warfare, where rapid technological innovation and tactical flexibility proved decisive in overcoming seemingly impregnable defensive positions. These lessons from history serve as a stark reminder of the cost of such engagements and the tremendous sacrifices made on the beaches of France, as well as across the vast expanse of the Pacific theater. The human toll inflicted in those pivotal battles was profound, and the lessons learned come with an enduring importance that must never be forgotten. Decades after the Second World War, veterans who served in the German 352nd Infantry Division frequently recalled the appearance of amphibious vehicle repulse engines, commonly known as AVRES, as the turning point that signaled the collapse of the Atlantic Wall's defenses. One surviving soldier vividly described the moment, saying, "We had been assured that our concrete bunkers could withstand any assault, that our machine guns, particularly the MG-42s, would mow down the attacking British and American troops as if they were wheat in a harvest field. We believed in the strength of our defenses. However, the sudden arrival of these armored vehicles, armed with their peculiar short-range guns, shattered that confidence entirely. The concrete structures that had seemed so formidable simply disintegrated, exploding as if they were made of paper, rendering months of painstaking fortification efforts utterly meaningless. This revelation delivered a devastating psychological blow, not only destroying physical defenses, but also eroding the very morale that upheld them. In this way, the AVRES's most significant contribution to Allied victory may have been their power to erode the psychological resilience of the defenders, effectively breaking the will to fight in addition to breaching physical barriers. The reaction of Italian soldiers fighting alongside the Germans in the Gothic Line was perhaps even more visceral. Many units, faced with the might of the Allied Churchill tanks, feared and dubbed Illustrator by the Italians, began to melt away rather than confront these steel monsters directly. The sight of a single AVRE demolishing a heavily reinforced position, after months of effort to establish that stronghold, proved overwhelming. Their personal accounts, preserved within Italian military archives, detail the profound sense of demoralization that swept through the ranks when they realized that no amount of fortification could truly protect them from these new armored threats. The realization that death could arrive at any moment from weapons they were powerless to counter led to mass surrender, contributing to the rapid disintegration of Axis forces in Italy and hastening the collapse of their defenses. On the other side of the Pacific, Japanese soldiers defending Okinawa faced horrifying psychological adversity despite their high regard for honorable death, a core tenet of Bushido. The advent of American flamethrower tanks, vehicles equipped with fiery weaponry, broke this resolve in a manner previously thought unthinkable. Numerous first-hand accounts describe soldiers abandoning their positions against direct orders rather than risking being incinerated alive. The terror inspired by these weapons represented a profound breach in their moral code, highlighting the sheer psychological impact that such technology could wield over even the most disciplined troops. It was a form of psychological warfare that transcended conventional combat. The threat of being burned alive was enough to force the abandonment of positions and surrender, altering the traditional notions of bravery and honor in warfare. The U.S. Army's Chemical Warfare Service recorded that the mere sight of flamethrower tanks often resulted in immediate surrender or mass retreat. An officer described how the psychological effect of these weapons was tenfold more significant than the casualties they inflicted physically. Entire sectors of defensive lines would collapse without a direct engagement just through the rumor or sight of approaching flame tanks, demonstrating how fear and morale could be manipulated as effectively as physical firepower. This underscores a fundamental aspect of modern warfare: the paramount importance of psychological dominance alongside technological superiority. The evolution of military technology during this period, marked by the decline of the MG-42 machine gun's dominance and the rise of specialized armor, serves as a microcosm of the broader technological race that defined World War II. The fierce competition between the Axis and Allied powers to develop innovative weaponry prompted relentless countermeasures, leading to an ever-spiraling cycle of technological advancement. Each side's innovations spurred responses from the other, creating a rapid arms race of sorts. Ultimately, the intensity and resourcefulness of Allied industrial capacity provided a decisive edge, enabling them to develop and deploy a variety of specialized solutions that would continually outpace the enemy's efforts. The MG-42, with its revolutionary roller lock mechanism and unparalleled rate of fire, was initially heralded as the ultimate infantry weapon when it was first introduced. Its rapid, sustained firepower brought devastating effects on the battlefield, transforming infantry combat and forcing opponents to develop new tactics and countermeasures. However, as the war progressed and newer forms of armor and specialized weaponry emerged, the MG-42's dominance waned, exemplifying how technological advancements could quickly render previously formidable equipment obsolete. The relentless pursuit of innovation during the conflict underscored the principle that in warfare, in the year 1942, a military vehicle was already demonstrating an uncanny ability to dominate expansive battlefield zones single-handedly, transforming the very nature of combat engineering and armored warfare. Its presence on the front lines commanded respect, and its innovative design allowed it to punch well above its weight, effectively turning the tide of engagements through sheer versatility and destructive power. By the time the year 1944 arrived, however, this formidable machine, once deemed almost unstoppable, was rendered powerless by a seemingly primitive yet surprisingly effective countermeasure. A simple, spring-powered mortar, often compared in appearance to medieval siege devices, but in fact a highly specialized instrument of destruction. The glaring obsolescence of these once indomitable vehicles became painfully evident during the Normandy campaigns. After-action reports from the British 79th Armored Division meticulously documented the destruction of 342 critical German fortifications within the first month of their operations. Each of these demolitions typically saved numerous Allied lives, sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds, by stripping away the heavily fortified defenses that otherwise would have inflicted catastrophic casualties. This grim tally served as a stark reminder of the strategic importance of these specialized armored vehicles and justified the considerable resources allocated to their development and deployment. It also underscored the desperation of German commanders, who scrambled to adapt their tactical approaches in an effort to counter this new threat. The leadership behind these innovations, particularly Major General Percy Hobart, initially faced skepticism and opposition due to his unconventional ideas and willingness to challenge traditional military thinking. His advocacy for the design and deployment of what came to be known as funnies, specialized engineering vehicles equipped with a variety of demolition tools, proved its worth when the results on the battlefield spoke volumes. Success, however, was attributed not merely to the machines themselves, but to the brave crews who operated them. Hobart often credited these personnel, whose daring and ingenuity turned static defenses into vulnerability, for the true victory. Among those who became legendary within their units were individuals like Sergeant Bill Hawkins of the 26th Assault Squadron. His exploits on D-Day exemplified the lethal effectiveness of the AVRE, as he personally destroyed 7 German bunkers before his Churchill tank was knocked out by an 88mm anti-tank gun. Similarly, Lieutenant James Morrison of the 82nd Assault Squadron used his AVRE to take down the formidable Maine stronghold at Hillman, an enormous complex that had withstood hours of relentless naval bombardment. These men, most of whom were Royal Engineers, volunteering for arguably the most perilous roles during the invasion, understood intuitively that their survival hinged on daring aggression. They knew they had to close quickly, deploying their petard mortars and demolition gear with precision before German anti-tank weapons could retaliate. A perilous race against time, where hesitation often meant death. The German military's defensive doctrine, honed over years of brutal combat on the Eastern Front, was built largely around well-entrenched MG-42 machine gun positions. These formidable lines of fire had mown down Soviet infantry in vast numbers, creating a seemingly impregnable web of defenses. Yet when faced with the specialized mobile assault vehicles like the AVRE, the Germans' traditional tactics proved catastrophically inadequate. Their existing defenses were designed to counter conventional attacks and standard tanks, not these nimble, demolition-capable engineering vehicles that could bypass or neutralize fortifications with lethal efficiency. This stark realization highlighted the danger inherent in military planning that depended on fighting the last war, ignoring the inevitability of future innovations. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's massive coastal defense system, which had consumed enormous resources, both material and propaganda, was believed to be virtually impregnable. It was heralded as an unassailable fortress, designed to withstand any invasion. However, during the D-Day invasion, this formidable obstacle crumbled in a matter of hours when faced with weapons that the defenses had not been designed to withstand. The AVRES and other specialized assault vehicles effectively rendered the static fortifications obsolete, turning what was thought to be the strongest line of resistance into deadly traps for the defenders. Post-war analysis by the German General Staff, conducted while many officers found themselves in Allied captivity, identified one critical failure: the inability to anticipate and counter these innovative armored assault vehicles. These insights revealed a fundamental flaw in German defensive strategy. The Germans recognized that by deploying vehicles like the Churchill AVRE and similar machines, the Allies had effectively invalidated years of defensive preparation. These vehicles could transform the battlefield within hours, turning fortified positions into death traps for defenders. The Germans' earlier dismissiveness toward Allied technological innovation, viewing it as inferior to their own engineering mastery, was decisively challenged. This acknowledgement marked a significant turning point in military thought, emphasizing the vital importance of agility and adaptability over static defenses. The impact and legacy of the AVRE extended far beyond the immediate aftermath of World War II. Its effectiveness and the lessons it imparted regarding the importance of specialized assault technology reshaped military doctrines and engineering strategies for decades to come. The recognition that modern warfare demanded adaptable, mobile, and integrated approaches. Throughout the tumultuous period spanning the Cold War and continuing into the modern era, military engineering doctrines evolved dramatically, shaped by the pressing demands of increasingly sophisticated warfare. As each major military power sought to outpace its rivals, a notable trend emerged: the development of increasingly specialized vehicles designed specifically to counter and dismantle fortified enemy positions. From the early days of Soviet engineered vehicles, such as the innovative infantry mobility robots, to the Israeli Defense Forces Puma combat engineering vehicle, these machines embodied the cumulative lessons learned through centuries of conflict. They were crafted with the explicit purpose of overcoming the hardened defenses that often stymied infantry and armored units, transforming the battlefield and redefining what was possible in siege warfare. The roots of these advancements can be traced back to pioneering engineering efforts during World War II, particularly those involving the renowned Churchill tanks. These tanks, originally designed as formidable assault vehicles, were later adapted into engineering platforms capable of delivering powerful demolitions directly onto fortified positions. The concept was revolutionary for its time, equipping heavily armored vehicles with large-scale demolition charges that could neutralize bunkers and other entrenched defenses from a protected vantage point. Many of these ideas, initially experimented with in the form of simple spigot mortars mounted on tracked platforms, laid the groundwork for the sophisticated missile systems and explosive devices used in contemporary combat engineering. Despite the dramatic evolution of technology, from primitive demolition charges to precision-guided munitions, the core stories of bravery and ingenuity behind these weapons continue to resonate as some of the most compelling narratives of military history. Tales emerge from the chaos of combat, illustrating the human element that underpins every technological development. For example, German machine gunners, desperately firing their MG-42s in the final moments of a confrontation, fought to the bitter end against advancing Allied forces, exemplifying the grim determination of soldiers who knew that each shot could be their last. Simultaneously, British engineers risked life and limb to maneuver close enough to enemy bunkers, deploying petard mortars, from the ancient French word meaning bomb, in a desperate attempt to breach fortifications and tilt the tide of battle. During the brutal battles in the Pacific, Japanese soldiers faced haunting choices: to burn alive in their entrenched positions or to abandon them, often opting for the latter as the enemy's specialized demolition tools rendered traditional defenses increasingly useless. These poignant individual accounts, preserved across memoirs, unit histories, and personal interviews, offer an unfiltered perspective on how technological innovation revolutionized combat. The seemingly simple addition of a spigot mortar to a Churchill tank, for instance, transformed it from a mobile artillery platform into a formidable siege weapon capable of turning safe bunkers into death traps in moments. Such stories reveal that military advancements are not merely about machinery, they are about human courage, ingenuity, and the relentless drive to improve battlefield effectiveness. One of the enduring symbols of this evolution is the MG-42 machine gun. Despite its origin in the World War II landscape, it survived the conflict and remained influential for decades to come. Its straightforward yet highly effective design was copied and adapted in subsequent firearms, including the American M60 and the Belgian FNMAG, standing as a testament to its fundamental robustness and reliability as a weapon system. The MG-42's legacy, however, also serves as a sobering reminder of the dangers inherent in over-relying on any single tactical solution. Its widespread use led to doctrinal strategies that placed undue emphasis on fixed defensive positions, where the machine gun's formidable suppressive fire could be most effectively employed. This tactical reliance, rooted in the confidence that such weapons could dominate the battlefield, resulted in the construction of extensive, heavily fortified strongholds. These fixed positions, designed around maximizing MG-42's firepower, inadvertently introduced critical vulnerabilities, particularly when they could be targeted and destroyed with demolition charges or innovative engineering solutions. During the harsh realities of the later stages of World War II, these shortcomings became painfully evident. The final defenses set up by German forces in 1945 as Allied armies advanced across the Rhine and pushed into the Reich's core were a testament to this evolution. They featured dispersed and concealed MG-42 positions instead of the earlier, more conspicuous bunkers. This shift demonstrated an uneasy recognition that purely static defenses were increasingly obsolete amidst the swift and adaptive tactics of the Allies. Yet by that late stage, Germany's defensive resilience was already compromised. The industrial and technological might of the Allied forces had accumulated thousands of specialized vehicles, each tailored with the capability to deal effectively with any form of fortified resistance. These vehicles, equipped with specialized demolition equipment, specialized weapons, and countermine systems, symbolized a technological arms race that rendered traditional static defenses increasingly irrelevant. It was a stark realization. A well-placed demolition charge or a precision-engineered engineering vehicle could fundamentally alter the course of the battlefield, turning entrenched positions into mere afterthoughts in the grand strategic picture. In this ongoing historical saga, the collision between traditional military doctrines centered around firepower and fortified positions and innovative technological approaches that sought to neutralize those very defenses was in the final months of World War II, the last units to surrender, most notably the crews operating the formidable MG-42 machine guns, remained steadfast in their positions until May of that year. These veterans had survived the entire tumultuous conflict, witnessing firsthand the dramatic evolution of warfare that carried them from the victorious heights of 2040's early campaigns to the devastating defeats of 1945. They had witnessed their once dominant weapon system go from an icon of battlefield supremacy to a relic of a bygone era, rendered increasingly obsolete by rapid technological advancements. The transformation of battle tactics and weaponry during this period was nothing short of revolutionary, and these soldiers observed it all with growing incredulity. Their weapons, once feared across battlefields for their decisive firepower, gradually lost their decisive edge amid new forms of attack and defense. The shifting tides of war, marked by relentless innovation, made it clear that no piece of equipment could guarantee victory forever. The witnesses of this change bore silent testimony to a fundamental truth of modern warfare, that technological dominance is transient and that the capacity to adapt determines survival. Meanwhile, in the Pacific theater, the approach to final victory was profoundly affected by the dramatic developments of August 1945, when Japan capitulated following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as the Soviet Union's sudden invasion of Manchuria. These events abruptly halted plans for a massive invading force intended to assault the Japanese home islands directly. The anticipated invasion, which had been meticulously prepared for by the Allies, would have faced fierce resistance from a population that had been extensively drilled in unconventional and desperate tactics. Resistance that included fighting with sharpened bamboo spears and employing suicide attacks on Allied forces reflecting a nation driven to extreme measures to defend its homeland. In anticipation of this fierce obstacle, military strategists had already devised contingency plans that involved the deployment of specialized vehicles such as flamethrower tanks and other combat machines designed explicitly for assaulting fortified caves and entrenched positions. These wartime preparations aimed to leverage firepower, particularly the devastating effectiveness of flamethrower tanks, destined to burn out complex and elaborate defensive networks constructed by the Japanese in their underground strongholds. The lessons of Okinawa, where such armor had succeeded in destroying extensive cave defenses, underscored the importance of these tactics. It was estimated that, had the invasion gone ahead, the majority of Japanese casualties would have resulted from these highly specialized offensive vehicles, which would have inflicted pain and destruction on a scale that defied previous understanding. A comparative examination of the defensive failures experienced by German, Japanese, and Italian forces in the face of advancing Allied armor reveals recurring patterns. Each faced similar pitfalls: overconfidence in the durability of fixed fortifications, an inability to quickly adapt to emerging threats, and the psychological fallout from the realization that their seemingly impregnable positions might actually be vulnerable. These lessons, derived from hard-earned battlefield experience, continue to inform military strategy to this day. They serve as stark reminders that static defenses and an over-reliance on traditional firepower can be catastrophically inadequate against innovative assault tactics, especially when aggressors harness new technologies. The tragic fates of the MG-42 crews defending Normandy, who perished in their bunkers amidst roaring combat, mirror those of Japanese machine gunners trapped in their caves at Okinawa and Italian soldiers fleeing their positions along the Gothic Line. All fell victim to a fundamental misconception: the belief that defensive firepower, fortified positions, or traditional defensive methods could preemptively counter evolving attack strategies. This widespread error, underestimating the relentless march of innovation, proved costly across multiple fronts. Today, against a backdrop of new military threats, ranging from drones and precision-guided munitions to cyber warfare, the historical narrative of how a humble flying dustbin, the British Churchill AVRE, managed to overcome entrenched MG-42 nests rings ever more true. It serves as a poignant reminder that no defensive system remains invulnerable forever. The essence of modern combat has shifted toward understanding that success hinges on continual innovation and the willingness to adapt rapidly in response to emerging threats. The next significant conflict will likely be won by the forces that develop their own technological equivalents of the AVRE, powerful, versatile tools capable of demolishing defenses that once seemed near impossible to breach. The concrete bunkers scattered across Normandy's battlefield, now silent memorials and popular tourist destinations, stand as enduring symbols, testament not only to the bravery and sacrifice of those who fought within their walls, but also to the power of ingenuity and inventive thinking in overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles. These resilient structures remind us that ingenuity is a vital element of warfare, an enduring lesson that remains just as relevant today as it was on June 6, 1944. On that historic day, the first Churchill AVRE boldly cleared its initial MG-42 nest, symbolically transforming the battlefield by deploying a flying dustbin, a seemingly unconventional yet remarkably effective piece of engineering, marking a turning point in combat tactics. This story continues to inspire military innovation.